By the time the office lights softened into evening gold, I already knew something was wrong. For months, she had talked about napkins, flowers, songs, centerpieces. The venue she kept calling a surprise. Every lunch break became a wedding update. Every coffee refill, another detail dangled like a ribbon in front of me. I listened, because that is what I had always done for her. And because somewhere in my chest, I believed I would be there when the doors finally opened. That stayed with me. We were not just coworkers in my mind. We were two women who had carried pieces of each other across years that felt bigger than calendars. Same neighborhood once, same schools, same old roads beneath our shoes. And now the same office hum stitching our weekdays together. She had helped me get this job. I had helped her survive grief, stress, deadlines, and the 1,000 tiny breakdowns no one else saw. That history made me trust the shape of us. That stayed with me. That stayed with me. When she got engaged, I felt honestly happy for her. Not politely happy. Not the kind of smile you wear because someone else is glowing and you do not want to dim the room. I was relieved for her. Life had not always been gentle, and this felt like a bright chapter finally turning in her favor. So I let myself get swept up in it. I pictured a good dress, laughter under fairy lights, and a place at the edge of her happiest day. I held still. I kept pretending the silence meant nothing at all. The strange part was how naturally she made me feel included without ever saying the words. She would lean over her lunch tray and whisper updates like secrets meant only for me. Which flowers looked cheap? Which cousin might cause drama? Which color made the room feel warm instead of stiff? It was all so intimate, so constant, that my mind stopped asking whether I was invited and started deciding what shoes would survive the garden path. I knew that feeling would follow me home that night. Then invitations began appearing at work like bright little verdicts. One colleague mentioned hers with a laugh. Another tucked an envelope into her handbag. A third, someone my friend barely spoke to beyond meetings, said she still had not RSVP'd. I smiled through it, waiting for my turn to make sense. Maybe mine had been mailed home. Maybe she planned to hand it to me privately. Maybe the postal system had swallowed it whole. Maybe. That stayed with me. That stayed with me. Hope is such a skilled tailor. It can take one missing envelope and stitch an entire wardrobe of excuses around it. I wore every one. She has been busy. She forgot to mention it. She wants the venue to be a surprise. She must assume I already know I'm invited. All the while, she kept talking to me as if nothing was odd at all. She described wedding stress in loving detail, and never once touched the question spreading cold roots inside me. I knew that feeling would follow me home that night. I started looking backward then, not just at the invitation, but at us. I saw every lunch where she emptied out her fears while I held them for her. Every task I picked up when her world was too heavy. Every office favor I gave gladly because friendship is supposed to be light in your hands, not a ledger. And when I searched those memories for matching moments, for the time she had carried me, the cupboard echoed more than it answered. I knew that feeling would follow me home that night. There were signs I had filed away under kindness. The way she nodded when I spoke, then circled the conversation back to herself before my sentence had settled. The way my bad week seemed to bounce harmlessly off her. While hers became urgent weather systems I reorganized my day around. The way helping her had begun to feel normal. And asking for help from her somehow felt like asking for a favor from someone already put upon. It still stung. I kept pretending the silence meant nothing at all. None of that meant she was cruel, I told myself. People are lopsided. Life makes us selfish in seasons. Weddings make everyone strange. Still, the pattern had a spine now, and once I felt it, I could not unfeel it. I wondered whether I had mistaken proximity for devotion, history for intimacy, convenience for care. It is unnerving to realize a relationship may have lived in two different sizes at once. One in your heart, and another in the other person's hands. That stayed with me. I held still. At work, I began the smallest retreat. No dramatic silence. No slammed doors. Just less. I stopped orbiting her desk. I let lunch happen without assuming it would be together. I answered warmly, then returned to my screen. The office had its own weather. Printers coughing. Keyboards ticking. Someone always heating soup too early in the day. Inside all that normal noise, I quietly stepped back and waited to see whether she would notice that I was no longer always there beside her every day. She did not notice. Or if she did, she treated the change like passing weather. Nothing worth naming. That hurt more than the invitation ever could. I had imagined being taken for granted in the abstract, but the real version was sharper. It looked like me becoming smaller in her week without leaving a visible gap. It looked like my silence not interrupting her rhythm. It looked like learning that my place in her life was not a seat at all, only something useful she had grown used to seeing. Friends online would later call that realization a gift. But gifts are not supposed to arrive dressed like humiliation. I felt foolish in a private, adolescent way, the kind that makes you replay every warm memory and hold it up like counterfeit money. Had I invented half the closeness? Had she known I cared more and simply let that imbalance benefit her? Was I angry with her, or ashamed that I had built a whole friendship house on land she had never offered me to keep? I flushed with shame. I thought about asking directly, not dramatically, just plainly. Did my invitation get lost? Are you keeping things small? Is there some reason I should know? But every sentence carried a hidden blade. If she had chosen not to invite me, asking would force her to say it aloud. If I had misread everything, I would become the pathetic woman at work begging for proof that I mattered. Dignity and truth rarely arrive together, and I could not tell which one I feared losing more in that moment. I also could not ignore the setting. This was not an old friendship drifting across distant cities where awkwardness can dissolve into miles. This was fluorescent lighting, weekly meetings, shared hallways, and coworkers who would notice changes in temperature. A badly handled conversation would not end after one bruising afternoon. It would cling to conference rooms and kitchen corners for weeks. I was only protecting my pride. I was trying to keep my workplace from souring with private grief. Still, uncertainty has a way of chewing through restraint. I needed to know enough to stop the guessing, even if I could not bear to demand a confession. So, one lunch, with all the care of someone stepping onto thin ice, I tilted the conversation toward the invitations. I asked whether they had all gone out now. The question sounded simple, even friendly. But beneath it, my whole body braced like a witness waiting to hear a verdict that had already been written somewhere beyond my reach. Her face changed immediately. Panic flickered there, thin and bright, gone quickly but not quickly enough. It was the expression of someone who had stumbled into the exact corridor she hoped to keep locked. In that instant, before another word was spoken, I felt the answer arrive. If this had been a postal error or casual oversight, there would have been confusion, concern, apology. What I saw instead was fear, relief, the look of someone trying to contain a spill before anyone else noticed. When she confirmed the invitations were all sent, I did not ask the obvious question. I took a side road instead. I asked whether that meant she could finally show me the venue she had kept hidden all this time. She agreed and turned the screen toward me, grateful for the safer subject. Country hotel. Nice gardens. Soft stone walls. Spaces for the ceremony, the drinks, the photographs. She described it eagerly, and I watched the place I would never stand inside come alive in front of me anyway. The secrecy that had once felt playful suddenly looked ridiculous in full daylight. There was no grand reveal waiting for me. No magical moment where I would receive my place card and understand the joke. It was just a venue. Lovely enough, yes, but ordinary in the way most dream places become when hope is stripped away. I nodded at the gardens, admired the staircase, asked the right questions, all while something inside me quietly folded itself into a shape small enough to survive lunch. I tested the edges one more time. I asked who from work had been invited, carefully casual, as if I cared only about office gossip and seating charts. My name never surfaced. Neither did any sentence that might soften the omission. She did not say there had been limits. She did not say she was sorry. She did not offer one of those humane little lies people reach for when they know they have hurt someone. She simply let the absence sit there between us while I pretended not to bleed, in silence. Then, when I shifted the subject toward her honeymoon, she relaxed so visibly it almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, but because the truth had become complete. She was relieved the danger had passed. Relieved I had not forced her to explain. Relieved she could keep the story moving without pausing at the part where I discovered I had been written out of the celebration. In that relief, more than in the missing invitation, I finally understood the hierarchy between us with clarity. I walked back to my desk carrying an answer I have never technically been given. No invitation had been lost. No misunderstanding had drifted into the mail. I was simply not on the list. And the clearest reason, the one I could feel settling into place without hearing it from her, was that she did not think of me as a close friend. Maybe I was a trusted coworker, a dependable listener, a familiar comfort, but I was not someone she needed beside her when the doors finally opened. That realization should have sparked anger first, that sadness reached me earlier, not because I needed a wedding meal or a dance floor or a favor returned in satin and champagne. What I had wanted was proof that our friendship was real in both directions. The invitation became a symbol before I understood it was one. Losing it meant losing the version of us I had carried for years. I was not grieving an event. I was grieving a map that no longer matched the land beneath my feet. I considered confronting her anyway, just to hear the words and stop the speculation. Yet 3 thoughts kept rising like buoys I could not swim past. First, I already knew enough. Second, I did not want the office to become a theatre for private pain. Third, this was still her wedding. Her once-in-a-lifetime pageant of nerves and joy, and I could not bear becoming a storm cloud over it. There is a difference between seeking closure and forcing someone to bleed just because they wounded you. So I chose a quieter kind of respect. I would not plead for a seat. I would not force a brittle conversation, just so she could finally say what her actions had already announced. Instead, I would accept the information hidden inside the wound and behave accordingly. The friendship, at least as I had believed in it, was over. Some endings do not arrive with shouting. They arrive with clarity so complete that staying any longer begins to feel like volunteering for thirst in a house with no water. The next few days were oddly calm. The embarrassment that had flared so hot at first cooled into analysis. With distance, her old habits sharpened into focus. She had always been self-involved. Bridehood had not created that trait, only exposed it. She liked being listened to. She liked being helped. She liked being defended. But reciprocity, that basic muscle of friendship, had rarely interested her. I had mistaken access to her inner life for a place inside her inner circle. It hurt. I thought about how often I had excused her. Some coworkers disliked her, and I had always softened their complaints. I knew she could be entitled, knew she could leave others carrying more than their share, knew she could tilt every conversation back toward herself. But because I loved the history, and because I loved being the one who understood her, I translated those flaws into harmless quirks. Loyalty becomes a bad editor when it is afraid the truth might end the story. There had been practical imbalances too. The kind easier to miss because they hide inside routine. I helped with her workload when life hit hard. I listened when grief made her jagged. I gave time, emotional space, and protection. When I needed help, she had a way of being unavailable without seeming openly cruel. A no here, a shrug there, a changed subject, a reasonable excuse. Stacked together, those moments showed how often I showed up for her without ever needing to be persuaded. And yet, I was not innocent in this pattern. That was one of the harder truths and maybe the most useful. I had let my fear of confrontation turn me into easy furniture. I swallowed discomfort until it fermented into private resentment. I avoided naming small hurts when they first appeared, which meant they returned later carrying armor and banners. My kindness was real, but so was my passivity. I had been handing out unlimited access and calling it generosity, even when it left me drained. Looking back, I realized how often I treated difficult conversations like cliffs instead of doors. I would rather absorb confusion for months than risk one honest, shaky sentence. That habit had not created her selfishness, but it had preserved the arrangement. It let me keep hoping that if I stayed useful, patient, and undemanding enough, the relationship would somehow prove itself equal. Instead, it kept me trapped in a role built on giving, while asking little from the other side. There is a particular loneliness in learning that someone can enjoy your presence deeply, without ever intending to carry your weight in return. It does not look like hatred. It looks like ease. They call when they need comfort, not because they cherish your inner life. They assume your support the way people assume chairs will stay beneath them. And if you slowly pull away, they may not chase you, because what they miss is less you than the role you performed in the shape of their days. Once I saw that, something inside me unclenched. I did not have to keep auditioning for a closeness she was not offering. I did not have to decode every interaction as a possible sign of hidden affection. I could simply believe what the evidence had been spelling in daylight. She was not my villain, and I was not her chosen friend. We were two women at the same workplace who had built a lopsided arrangement and mistaken its familiarity for permanence. Truth can wound, but it also clarifies. So I made space. I turned toward other colleagues, the ones whose kindness had always waited at the edge of my tunnel vision. People who asked how my weekend was and stayed for the answer. People whose warmth did not arrive attached to endless extraction. The office felt wider when I stopped spending all my emotional energy in one place. I had believed losing her would leave me stranded. Instead, it quietly returned me to people I had not really allowed myself to notice before. Even then, grief did not vanish just because insight had arrived. It still returned in awkward flashes. Hearing someone mention bridal showers, seeing white flowers in a shop window, watching her laugh with another coworker, while discussing table plans as if I had never pictured what her wedding day might look like. Healing rarely moves in a straight line. It circles. It revisits. It presses old bruises to see whether they still answer. Mine did, though each answer came back softer. At the center of that sadness was not envy. It was the ache of being misread by someone I had tried so hard to read well. I had given her mercy, patience, context, and time. I had learned the shape of her moods like a second language. Yet she had either not noticed what this omission would mean to me, or noticed and decided my feelings were manageable collateral. Both possibilities stung. One suggested carelessness. The other suggested calculation. Neither left room for friendship. Still, I could not pretend I wished her harm. That remained true in a way that surprised me. I did not want to ruin her wedding season, or drag her into a guilty explanation, or stand in front of her joy demanding a receipt for all I had given. Maybe that sounds noble. Maybe it was only exhaustion wearing a nicer coat. But I knew I could live with letting the matter fade. I was less sure I could live with bitterness growing sharp enough to follow me into other parts of my life. So I let the drift continue. If she never asked, then distance would become the answer. If one day she noticed the missing lunches, the shorter chats, the unclaimed intimacy, then maybe I would speak more plainly. Not to accuse, but to name what had happened. Until then, I preferred the quiet. There is power in choosing not to chase a person into clarity when clarity has already been granted by their choices. Silence, used well, can mean refusing humiliation and choosing yourself. Around that time, I began reading the responses people had given me after I shared my situation online. Some were blunt enough to sting, but the sting clarified things. They pointed to the one-sidedness I had normalized. They pointed to my fear of confrontation, the way I let small injuries pile into monuments. They pointed, correctly, to the possibility that I had built part of my identity around being useful to people who were happy to keep taking. It was tough love, and I needed it. One comment in particular stayed with me. Fear of confrontation does not keep relationships peaceful. It only postpones the mess until it grows teeth. I knew that was true. If I had spoken earlier, maybe months earlier, I might have recognized the limits of this friendship before the wedding turned them into spectacle. Or maybe I would have learned sooner that she valued me less than I hoped. Silence had not protected me. It had only delayed the bill and made the cost feel heavier. That realization sent me searching for tools instead of comfort. I ordered books on assertiveness, not because I wanted to become sharper or colder, but because I wanted language before resentment. I wanted to learn how to say, gently and in time, that something hurt, that I needed more, that a pattern felt unfair. The dream was not to become fearless. The dream was smaller and more human. I wanted honesty to stop feeling like an emergency siren each time it rose toward my throat. I even considered coaching or a little therapy. Not because this friendship disaster deserved a shrine, but because it had exposed a weakness in me. Anxiety had too much influence over my relationships. It turned small clarifications into mountains. It made me believe harmony was always kinder than discomfort. But harmony built on self-erasure is only a prettier form of loneliness. If I kept living that way, this story would repeat with new faces. And I could already see the pattern. There was another lesson too, one that reached beyond her. I started examining the rest of my friendships with a steadier gaze. Who listened as well as they spoke? Who only appeared when their own life was on fire? Where had I mistaken familiarity for reciprocity? Where had I perhaps done the same thing to someone else, enjoying their attention without noticing how little room I gave them in return? Pain is a ruthless teacher, but sometimes it grades more than one paper at a time. I found a few relationships that needed gentler boundaries. One friend vented endlessly and vanished when I needed grounding. Another I realized I had not been nurturing from my side, because imbalance does not always travel in one direction. That was humbling. It kept me from turning this whole story into a tidy morality play, where I was the wounded saint, and she was the selfish bride. Life rarely arranges itself so neatly. We are all capable of neglect when comfort makes us careless. What changed most was my understanding of listening. I had always treated it as my finest gift, and maybe it was. But gifts need containers. Without limits, listening curdles into unpaid labor, and warmth becomes a public utility people tap into, without asking how the reservoir is doing. I did not want to stop being kind. I wanted to stop mistaking endless availability for intimacy. There is a healthier form of generosity that does not require me to disappear in order to prove I care. As her wedding drew nearer, the office kept humming as though nothing had happened. Emails flew, meetings multiplied. Someone complained about the printer. Someone else brought biscuits. She mentioned her plans less to me, either because my distance had registered or because she had enough other listeners. Oddly, that made things easier. The fewer ribbons she unspooled in front of me, the steadier I felt. I no longer needed proof. I had already been given enough to draw a boundary. Sometimes, though, I imagined a version where she had said early that the wedding would be small and she was sorry. That version still would have hurt, but it would have left the friendship with some dignity. It was not exclusion alone that damaged us. It was the way she let me hover in implied closeness while discussing the celebration in detail, never once offering the courtesy of honesty. Omission can still be cruel when the other person has trusted silence too long, and trusted you. I also imagined the version where I had asked sooner, when my imagination stitched a gown out of assumptions. In that version, maybe I cried in private and moved on faster. Maybe I learned earlier that some people enjoy devotion they never intend to match. Maybe I discovered that self-respect sometimes sounds like one awkward question asked at the right time. Regret can be useful when it points ahead. Mine did. It kept pressing me toward the promise. Next time I would speak sooner. By then, the sharpest pain had mellowed into a bruise I could touch without flinching. I was still sad. Yes. Losing the idea of a friend can ache as much as losing the person. Sometimes more. But I was no longer desperate for restoration. I did not need our old lunches back. I did not need a seat to appear at the wedding. I needed something simpler and sturdier. I needed to trust that I could survive disappointment without abandoning myself in the process. That mattered most now. That trust began to return in tiny ways. I made room for colleagues who felt easier, kinder, less consuming. I answered messages without dropping everything. I noticed when someone changed the subject away from me and chose not to chase it. I practiced imagining that my thoughts deserved airtime, not just use in someone else's crisis. These were small revolutions, almost invisible from the outside, but inside they felt structural, as if I were opening doors in a house I had outgrown. I do not know whether she will ever ask why things changed. Maybe she prefers not knowing. Maybe my withdrawal registered only as adult life thinning contact and moving people to different shelves. If that is the story she tells herself, I cannot stop her. Part of growing up is accepting that some people will misunderstand your silence, because understanding would require them to revisit what they took from you. Not everyone is brave enough for that work. Some never will be, sadly. What I can do is honor what this taught me. Friendship is not measured by how much sorrow you can absorb without complaint. It is measured by movement in both directions, by mutual curiosity, by the willingness to notice when the other person is fading. It is measured by who asks after your heart and waits through the answer, who shows up without being managed, who tells you the truth before circumstances have to. Anything less may still be pleasant, but it is not the home I wanted. If there is a villain in this story, it is not a wedding invitation sealed against me. It is the quiet partnership between her self-centeredness and my fear. One person kept taking, the other kept allowing, and together we created a relationship that looked stable until one public milestone threw light across the seams. I cannot rewrite her nature, but I can refuse to cooperate with that pattern again. That may be the only justice ordinary heartbreak offers. Not revenge, but revision. So I let her have her wedding, her flowers, her country hotel, her bright photographs taken in gardens I once expected to walk through. I hope the day was beautiful. I mean that. And I hope, in some future season, I stop thinking of the missing invitation as a rejection and start seeing it as an accidental truth serum. It showed me where I stood. It showed me what I had ignored. It showed me that being needed is not the same as being cherished, no matter how warmly it is wrapped. When I picture myself now, I no longer see the woman waiting by the mailbox of someone else's priorities. I see someone learning, slowly, how to take up her own space. Someone practicing clear words before resentment. Someone learning that boundaries are translations, not punishments. They tell the world where care can enter, and where it must stop pretending to be love. I wish I had learned that lesson sooner. Still, I am grateful to have learned it before repeating it once again. In the end, I was not really left out of a wedding. I was let out of an illusion. The friendship I mourned had already been thinning long before the invitations arrived. The envelope just made the emptiness visible. And while that truth hurt, it also gave me something sturdier than fantasy ever had. It gave me a chance to choose relationships that breathe both ways, to speak sooner, to expect more, and to walk forward knowing that losing a one-sided bond is not failure. It is a start.